Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. On our behalf, I want to thank Shannon and Kevin and Christina for inviting us here and making this conversation possible. My name is Alex Gladstein. I work at the Human Rights Foundation. We promote and protect civil liberties and human rights around the world, especially in closed and closing societies. One of our goals is to connect people from different industries, like maybe you out here in the crowd today, with people in the human rights struggle. And we do this through our programs like the Oslo Freedom Forum and others. I'm honored to be here today with two very inspiring individuals. Abdalaziz Alhamza is an award-winning Syrian journalist and human rights defender. He's the founder and spokesperson of Raqqa is Being Slaughtered Silently, which is a nonprofit that exposes the crimes of the Assad regime and ISIS and other groups in Syria. Aziz started peaceful protests against the Assad regime in 2011 and was arrested 3 times. Later, when ISIS took his hometown of Raqqa as their capital, they interrogated him and detained him. He eventually escaped to Turkey and started RBSS with his friends to show the world the reality of life inside ISIS control. Trevor Timm is the co-founder and executive director of the Freedom of the Press Foundation, whose mission is to protect and defend public interest journalism in the 21st century. They use digital security, internet advocacy, and crowdfunding initiatives to support journalists and whistleblowers worldwide. We're here today to discuss the platform paradox. Basically, this idea that centralized technology platforms like Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter have, on the one hand, democratized journalism, but on the other hand, also empowered extremist voices and government propaganda. So we're going to dive into this today. But to start things off, I wanted to hear from Aziz to give you an idea of his story. And we'll start with, why did you become a citizen journalist?
Yeah, so first, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for being here. So I have 4 minutes to tell you all that things, and I have 20 slides to go through. So I'm gonna start with my slides. So in March 2011, the Syrian revolution started. So it started as a peaceful demonstrations among the country. And I came from a city called Raqqa that turned to be the capital of ISIS later on. And my city before ISIS was completely forgotten, even in the weather news. So where's the circle? That's my city. So they've been mentioning all the cities, but not my city. So for me, just being part of the protests and the demonstrations and going back home to check the local TV and all what they were speaking about what would happen to the sun, what would happen to the earth if the sun would disappear. So that pushed me to go to the street next day and film the demonstrations. And I had a old Nokia mobile phone, and I uploaded that video on YouTube, and my video of the demonstration was picked by several TV channels. So I decided to be a citizen journalist to show what's really going on in Syria and to show the protest. So because of my activities, as Alex mentioned, I got arrested 3 times by the government, investigated by ISIS several times. So later on, my city, Assad forces or the government forces was defeated from my city. And then ISIS, and I played a role organizing the demonstrations and filming everything, writing articles, doing several campaigns. And later on, ISIS showed up, they took over the control of my city. They started human rights violations. Later on, I escaped to Turkey, and my colleagues and I, we decided to organize or to start something to show the reality of what's going on under ISIS control, because ISIS prevented all the media organization to get there. So we decided to start our new organization, which is called Raqqa is Being Slaughtered Silently. So it was an online platform to expose ISIS atrocities and at the same time to do online campaign to educate people about what's going on. Because at the same time where ISIS started to use the social media and the internet as a main tool to recruit people from everywhere, so they were able to recruit thousands of people from more than 84 countries, and they did all that through the internet. So we decided to use the internet to counter their propaganda. So it happened through more than one campaign. This one of the campaigns that we did is called The Other Side. So here to the right, you would find like people waiting in line to get some food while ISIS fighters are eating like in fancy restaurants. So it was like a way to show people that like how ISIS is treating like the people there. So we did other things. We did like graffiti campaigns like in ISIS strongholds. We did like also poster campaigns. We did our own magazine. We distribute our magazine in like ISIS territories to educate people about what's going on. This section was like for children to let them understand what's going on and to have like education because ISIS shut down all the schools and universities at the city. So at the same time, like we turned to be like the main source of information from ISIS territories. So we like people started to take our materials and our stuff to be the main source of information instead of ISIS propaganda. That led us like to be in trouble. So ISIS spread like security cameras trying like to find our team members. So I have like 17 colleagues who are operating in ISIS territories. So they tweeted that thing, having like security cameras all over the street, trying to catch us, and like that what my colleague did. They went to the street and they took photos of the security cameras and we tweeted. So later on, ISIS assassinated like 10 between family members, colleagues, friends in Syria and even outside Syria, even in Turkey. So it was like a way to stop our work. Later on, they tried like through like the online network. So they tried to hack our website, our social media, and there were like many research about like the attack that they've been doing, and like there are like many articles like on the Guardian and like other international newspaper about all the cyber attacks that ISIS was doing, like trying to hack us. And eventually, to know more about like what I was speaking about, we just released a documentary about our work. It's called City of Ghosts. It's available on Amazon. So thank you.
Thank you, Aziz. It's a real honor to be here with you today. Thank you. So obviously, technology made your work possible. With citizen journalism, you never would have been able to capture those videos had you not had a smartphone. On the other hand, government censorship and surveillance has wreaked a lot of havoc in other areas. And Trevor, I wanted to start with you by asking you, why did you start the Freedom of the Press Foundation?
Sure. So it's interesting, right now there is this very public war on journalism going on with the Trump administration, where Trump is calling or disparaging journalists pretty much on a daily basis, calling them the enemies of the American people, threatening new laws, threatening to investigate them and even put them in jail. But there was a similar press freedom crisis in around 2012 during the Obama administration that was much more under the radar. The Justice Department at that point had started prosecuting more whistleblowers and sources of journalists than all other administrations combined. And there was several scandals involving journalists, some of the best journalists in the country, being surveilled and spied on by the US government in these cases. And when we started Freedom of the Press Foundation, we noticed that in a lot of these cases, you would see journalist phone calls or journalist emails showing up in court documents, where the government was going to Facebook or Google or an AT&T and Verizon and gathering up all of this data in secret. And it was really causing a chill in the investigative journalism community. Sources were scared to talk to them. And so at Freedom of the Press Foundation, we wanted to use technology to protect journalists. It had provided so many ways for journalists to find more sources than ever before, but it's also been this tool that the government can use to go after them. So we do digital security training with journalists. We build our own anonymity and encryption tools, and essentially try to evangelize the journalism community around using these tools to protect themselves. And so about 6 months after we were founded, and this is essentially what we were loudly advocating when we were first founded in 2012 and 2013. About 6 months after we started, at that point, unknown individual came to two of our board members, Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras. That person ended up being Edward Snowden, the NSA whistleblower, who then sparked one of the most important stories on surveillance and national security in the last generation. And so that had really kicked off this work to work with journalists to learn a new way of doing their job. And so we build the Secure Drop project, which is in about 60 news organizations worldwide, which we can talk about a little bit more. But now we're seeing the fruits of this labor. Now that the Trump administration has started this new war on journalism, we're seeing how these major newspapers have really attempted to hold the administration accountable, and we want that to continue for years and years to come.
And when it comes to the platform paradox, talk to us a little bit about the danger of the over-reliance on platforms like Facebook and YouTube and Twitter.
Well, for journalists in particular, it's a really tough problem. For decades, journalists could protect their sources by refusing to testify against them in court. Even some journalists, in a few famous cases, have gone to jail rather than give them up. But what the government figured out about a decade ago, starting with the Bush administration and then the Obama administration, was that they didn't need journalists to testify anymore. They could go to Google and get somebody's Gmail, or they could send a legal order to AT&T and find out exactly who they were talking to, when they were talking to them, and how frequently. And they could paint a picture of when stories were published, when sources inside governments talked to reporters, and cut the journalists out of the equation. And they no longer had that power to protect their sources. And so by using decentralized technologies, end-to-end encryption, anonymity tools that can mask essentially where you're coming from online, journalists can put that power back in their hands so that if the government does come after them directly, they can protest and they can stand up for themselves. And that's essentially what we try to bring to them at Freedom of the Press Foundation.
Excellent. And you'll see us talk about platforms that range from nearly the completely decentralized, like peer-to-peer messaging apps like Signal, for example, all the way over to the completely centralized, like you see in China today with WeChat. And I think this is a very timely conversation to tie things back to Aziz. Today, Fast Company published an article about how YouTube's algorithms have basically erased thousands of videos from Syria's war that were posted by human rights activists. So consider that much of what we know about the war in Syria today comes from citizen journalists. I think it's something like 4 million videos have been posted on YouTube from Syria since 2011. And it's been said that much in the same way that Vietnam was the first television conflict, Syria is the first YouTube conflict. But since last summer, in the middle of 2017, YouTube's algorithms have been censoring activist content. We're talking hundreds of channels and hundreds of thousands of videos. So much of what we know about the war is basically now at YouTube's discretion. But YouTube refuses to reveal what kind of algorithms they use to decide what goes and what stays. And in the end, we can be assured that they'll listen to regulators and shareholders, not Syrian citizen journalists. So Aziz, what is your take on this?
Yeah, so it's been like a huge problem among the Syrian activists or citizen journalists. So in Syria, like the citizen journalism was created without any knowledge and experience. And people, they used like the simple social media tools to get their messages out. And it was like a great tool because if like this revolution would happen like 30 years ago, it would be like done in like 2 or 3 days because nobody would hear about it. But people, they use like their mobile phone to film everything, put it online, and then being picked like by newspapers, TV channels, and all the other sources of information. But here when we're speaking about YouTube, speaking about Google, Facebook, or whatever, so like one example that we've been facing with YouTube, so we created like almost 8 or 9 YouTube channels because YouTube kept closing or like taking down our YouTube channels. At the same time, when Google has developed this tool which is called Jigsaw or like Jigsaw, like to filter like the search on extremism, they were using our material. So they were picking some videos that we upload on YouTube, and YouTube would come and close that YouTube channel. So like Google, which is basically YouTube and Google are the same. So one of them are using our videos and YouTube comes and like Google are using our videos and YouTube comes and like shut down our YouTube channels. And many people, they uploaded everything, all their materials, or their evidence against governments and other organizations on YouTube, and they don't have it saved anywhere else because they don't have the enough storage to save everything. So they thought that YouTube is a good way for documentation. So for us as RBSS, we started online academy to train people and teach them, don't use YouTube to upload your stuff or a way of documentation. Don't use Facebook as a way of communication because it's not safe. And it happened with us when we early started in 2014. One of our colleagues was assassinated because he was using or sending sensitive stuff on Facebook. So we started to introduce people to this new kind of technology, the new means of technology.
Right, so there's a lot of people, both of you in your networks out there that would want to hack or at least stop you. So what kind of tools do you rely on to protect your communications and sources? In particular, Trevor, maybe here's where you can dive into SecureDrop a little bit.
Sure. So SecureDrop is an open source whistleblower submission system. It was actually originally created by the late internet activist Aaron Swartz in 2011 and 2012. Essentially, it provides news organizations a safer and more secure way to accept documents and tips from sources. And so news organizations can install this on their website. It's completely decentralized. So we build the software, we help them install it, but once they have it, they own it, and we're locked out.
So gun to his head, he can't access this stuff.
Exactly. And so we are basically trying to eliminate Google and Facebook from the equation when sources and journalists are talking to each other. And so it's been steadily picking up steam over the past few years. After the 2016 election, the demand for it exploded. I think it's in about 60 or 70 major news organizations now, including the New York Times, Washington Post, AP, USA Today, a lot of the major papers in the United States. And it at least hopefully partially solves this problem. Unfortunately, it's a very large problem. Everybody uses Facebook, everybody uses Google. You can't use the internet without them. And I think that actually gets back to the larger question about this paradox.
Right.
It's very hard to tell people not to use Facebook. Facebook has been an amazing organizing tool in all sorts of countries when we're talking about protests, but it can come back to bite you. And when they have these rules that are set up for censorship, for example, when they're trying to ban hate speech or ban terrorism videos or combat this fake news problem, I think we need to talk much more nuanced and cautious about the things that we demand of them, because there are literally war crimes prosecutors who are furious that there aren't these videos on YouTube right now, so that they can prosecute war crimes in Syria. There was an article in the New York Times a few months ago about people who were trying to document hate speech on Facebook, people in vulnerable communities were getting it locked out of their accounts because Facebook thought that they were using hate speech. And the same thing happens with this fake news scandal, which is obviously a real problem. But when Google and Facebook changed their algorithms, they also made alternative and progressive news sites, their traffic plummeted because of this issue. And so it's not all black and white, and these
Right.
platforms don't necessarily have all the answers.
And what's being born out of this, largely this frustration of our reliance on these large centralized platforms is new decentralized platforms, which of course started with chat and messaging. But now there's a lot of people, including me maybe, who like the idea of being able to do more than that, to be able to transact value or store content, photos, videos in a censorship-resistant and immutable way. And there's an entire industry being born right now with companies who are enabling users to control their identity, their photos, their posts, in the same way that people can control their finances with Bitcoin. So in a way where no one can stop us or take our stuff down. But there's I guess a good example is Twitter kicked off a whole bunch of people that were considered, let's say, to be alt-right in the American political scene. And these people decided to start their own social media network on Ethereum, which is basically unstoppable. And some of the early Ethereum developers were like, no, you can't do this, you can't come on our platform. To which the rest of the community said, actually, they can. There's nothing you can do to stop this. So, of course, that leaves us with some tricky situations with, for example, terror groups and government propaganda, because they won't be able to be stopped either. Trevor, what role do you think decentralized platforms will play in our current world where we're kind of dominated by these centralized companies?
Well, we develop a decentralized platform, and obviously we're huge fans of it. I think it is sometimes harder. The reason that everyone uses decentralized networks is, number one, that all of their friends and family do, and number two, they make it easy. And so, when we're talking about open source tools or tools and communications platforms developed by nonprofits, there isn't the billions and billions of dollars invested in these tools that companies like Facebook and Google have. Oftentimes it's being done on a shoestring budget with a handful of developers or fewer. And I think we need to move from that for-profit angle to the more non-profit angle. A great example is Signal, the end-to-end encrypted messaging system, who for years, we were actually their fiscal sponsor for the last 3 years. It's being used by millions of people, yet there were about 3 developers working on the project. The founder of WhatsApp, Brian Acton, just created a new nonprofit where he invested $50 million to hopefully keep Signal alive for years and years to come. And so it was an amazing story, but unfortunately it's a unique story, and we need more of those.
Yeah, and one thing you might look out for, though, is that there are finally decentralized data and communications companies raising tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars for their new work. And indeed, Signal, if you read in the media about this project called MobileCoin, which is going to be baked into Signal, so it may allow you to actually transact value in the same way that you can transact secret messages on Signal. So there is a decentralized industry that I think we all should remain aware of, and this is something that actually may benefit groups like yours in a big way. I'd like to finish quickly with some thoughts from you, Aziz, on what do you think the audience can do to support citizen journalism and to support press freedom?
Yeah, so there are many things could be done. So first, just to rely on citizen journalism as source of information, because I've met many people who were telling me they couldn't understand the situation in Syria because it's so complicated and how it was produced or promoted in the media. So just watching the TV channel, so switching between CNN and Fox News, you would get completely different ideas watching both at the same time. So just relying on citizen journalism and supporting such movement that support whatever good cases or cause around the world. So I would encourage people just to do that.
And in your particular hometown, ISIS is now gone. So what are you supporting there? How has that changed your organization?
Yeah, so right now we're working on more than one campaign or more than one thing, and mainly we started this online academy to train organizations how to use encrypted means, how to communicate in a safe way, how to create environment where they would be safe and not targeted, whatever kind of trainings that they need. So we're trying to introduce them to the new technology, and to explain to them simple things that they don't know about it, because people there they had just this huge jump in technology or development. So people were using 5 megabytes per month to serve internet, and right now they were able to get access to the satellite net which is faster than my internet here in the US. Right. So people, they have this new technology, but they need to know how to use it. So we're trying to educate them about the ways or how to deal with the new technology.
That's a huge point. I mean, we can be rest assured that, as you've seen, bad actors will always use technology for bad aims. But it really takes organizations like both of yours to educate and to inform citizen journalists and independent media outlets about this new technology so they can take advantage of it and become more powerful. So hopefully you can talk to Trevor and Aziz today about how you can get involved. We have time for maybe a question or two. Does anyone want to ask anything from Aziz or Trevor? Anybody? It's a quiet audience today. Come on, can we get one hand? All right, back there.
When you, this is for Aziz. when you come to events like this and just the juxtaposition of seeing Raqqa after ISIS and then coming to the United States, and I guess what I'm basically trying to ask is the privilege that is kind of being thrown around here at an event like this. How do people who are a part of that world become more, besides and in addition to citizen journalism and paying attention to outlets like yours, how do we become more worldly in our views and less insular?
Sorry, but like I didn't get that question.
How do we educate ourselves about Syria, and how can we learn more about what life is like there?
Yeah, so it's been like a huge question, and it's like all about like fake news and like how to be able to get like to the sources of the real news or like the right news. So that's what we've been trying to push all the time. So to get like to get even like the media to use like the material of the citizen journalists and to have this kind of a new relation between the professional media and the citizen journalists themselves. So I know it's been like so hard to get access, but recently there've been many movies, documentaries about what's going on in Syria, which would be like the easiest way or tool to understand what's going on in Syria, because it's been like 8 years conflict. We're not speaking about a local conflict. It's like a proxy war between the US, Iran, Russia, China, Gulf States, Qatar, Turkey, and each of them see it from different perspective, and each like government or each group promoted from a different perspective. So there have been like many documentaries being done by like local Syrian people who live there, who are not belong to any part or any side of the conflict.
Well, and you can come talk to Aziz more and learn about what he's doing. Thank you all so much for listening today. We look forward to the rest of the event.
Thank you.